Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Julia. I was an admission officer at Haverford College, an outside reader for Emory University, and I currently work at Milton Academy, an independent boarding and day school outside of Boston, Massachusetts.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Canaan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. Good afternoon, friends. I'm excited to meet with our listening family and our occasional listeners in today's episode. And it's going to be a little different sequence than normal. I'm calling it a sandwich sequence. After I share some announcements and some updates and some things going on at Georgia and Connecticut, Julia and I will answer a Speakpipe question from Allison from New Jersey. Allison has three kids, 18 months apart. And if you're wondering how that happens, she has twins. But she's asking for an organizational tool to help her stay on track with all these college obligations. So Julia and I will share some advice and guidance and a couple of different resources for Allison and for all of you. Next, we'll have the final part of my interview with Jeff Selingo, and we pick up on the topic we left off with, how to know if a college is struggling financially. But then we get into just a range of topics, including undergraduate and graduate certificates, dual enrollment courses, and a couple of the books that Jeff has written. And of course, he goes on the hot seat. Now, I'm calling it the sandwich episode because I'm going to play a second Speakpipe question. It's one I actually played about a month ago, but I want to add a little extra something to my answer based on some feedback from listeners. And I also want to share an announcement from public schools in Georgia and the University of Connecticut. But let's start out with our announcements because I've got quite a few announcements today. So I've been thinking a lot about the listener from Connecticut who said, I bet there's a lot of wisdom out there amongst this community in terms of what parents and educators and college counselors have learned from their own kid going through the college process. And I'd love to hear what those lessons learned are from our listeners, just like you often ask the thought leaders you interview. And the more I think about it, the more I like this idea. So I hope that you will just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK and share any tips you have learned if you've been through the college process that we can share with others. I can't promise I'll air them all, but there's a good chance I will. So 31% of our listeners, according to our survey, have a student in college. So that's basically 1 in 3. So let's pool our wisdom and help each other out. Speaking of speakpipe.com/YCBK, I'm going to be asking you guys to use it in a few different ways. 3 different segments we have coming up that we're working on planning right now. So I've got an interview that's already been committed to in the works on athletic recruiting. And what I'd love to do is to answer your specific questions about athletic recruiting. So if you just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK and ask your athletic recruiting questions, we'll get them answered by our thought leader on that topic. We also have a date on our calendar now for Hillary, Julia, Susan, and Vince and I to do a roundtable again, similar to the one that we just did on the activity section. This time we're going to be discussing the honors section, and we want to make sure we're scratching where you're itching, so please send your specific questions about the honors section. Once again, it's speakpipe.com/YCBK, and we can get them answered on the roundtable. Now, we already have a date set. We're going to do that recording on the 18th of June, so anything that comes in by June 15th, we'll be able to answer it for you. I'm also planning a special episode with Kevin Newton, our international expert, to answer specific questions that you, our listeners, have about international universities. So once again, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK and ask any questions you have about international universities. And once we get a good number of them together, I'll say, hey, Kev, we got a good cadre of questions together. Let's do that interview we talked about doing. Just a reminder, we do not have the capacity to answer email questions. And every week, listeners send email questions in. And, we just don't have that capacity to take another 5, 7, 8 hours to respond to questions by email. So, the format for questions to be answered is speakpipe.com. And I hope you guys understand that. We also love hearing your voices. We think it adds to our community feel. And by the way, if you don't like your voice, or if you're nervous, or if you want to be anonymous, there's ways of doing it. You could say, hey, this is Jennifer, without saying your state. Or you could say, I'm a dad from Arizona, without saying your name. Or a couple of people have told me, I'm going to get somebody else to speak it because I don't like my voice. Is that okay? Absolutely. All are legit options. But that's the format if you have questions. So please don't send them in by email, because I know it feels really cold when I have to respond and say, please use Speakpipe if you have a question. And I don't know, just it's an uncomfortable feeling. Someone's asking a question. I like helping people, but once again, that would be another 5, 7, 8 hours some week of time we just don't have to answer all the questions. The registration form is now up for 2 of our co-hosts, Linda Depker and Lisa Ruff, Dr. Lisa Ruff. It is entitled Serenity Now, Strategies for Parents to Calm the College Admissions Process. This is going to be Thursday, May 30th, 8:30 Eastern, 7:30 Central, 6:30 Mountain, 5:30 Pacific, 1 hour webinar. And Lisa and Linda did a version of this at our regional conference in March, and I got to read all the reviews, and they were just stupendous. So Susan and I, we both said to Lisa and Linda, can you please do a parent version? So they've retweaked their presentation, and you'll be the first group to sign up in our new webinar software format. So you don't have to worry about how you look, because you won't be on camera. And once again, just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com/events to sign up. Our California listeners, you guys are the bomb.com. Now, my kids tell me I'm not allowed to say that, but guess what? They don't listen to the podcast, so they're not going to stop me. But they say, Dad, you can't say that. Anyway, you know how kids are. Our listeners reached out to say that they want to host a YCBA meet and greet. When I met last week, I'd be in California for 24 days, pretty much almost all of September. And we have 3 locations now, so this thing is really growing. So we have a date of Sunday, September 22nd in Santa Monica. We'll get back to you shortly with the time and more details. And all this stuff will be up on our events page on yourcollegeboundkid.com. We also had another listener who, said, I'm willing to host. And, we're going back and forth, whether it be Palo Alto or Fremont, but it's going to be kind of somewhere in that Palo Alto, Fremont area. And then this week, a San Diego listener said, I'd love to host an event. So there are going to be 3 in California in September, a chance to do a meet and greet with our listeners. And we'll have the dates and get the events up by mid-June for all 3. I only wish we had a travel budget for a whole team to attend. That would be amazing. But obviously, that's not logistically possible. But thank you so much for your kindness, your generosity, and you are proving that we are a listening family. All right, friends, there's an update from the University of Georgia. Now, I have been very, very harsh on the University of Georgia in the last 4 years for being literally all over the place when it comes to their policy on standardized testing. I mean, one year they literally changed their policy in the middle of the year. It has been absolutely ridiculous. But I'm going to give them a little bit of credit, because I guess they probably heard feedback that you can't make these last-second changes. So they have officially announced a change in the testing policy, and this refers to the 26 public schools that are governed by the University of Georgia's system, the USG system. So 7 of the 26 are going to require test scores, and they're basically the Tier 1 schools and the public university honors colleges. So Augusta University, the University of Georgia, Georgia Tech, Georgia College and State, Georgia State, Georgia Southern, and Kennesaw. So once again, these are your biggest universities in the state, as well as the public honors college. And the reason I'm giving them credit is because they're not putting it into effect until 2026. So they're giving people time to ramp up and adjust. And that's something that hasn't happened in the past. Now, UGA, Georgia Tech, and Georgia College have required test scores as of this year. So they'll still be required for those schools for 2025. But the 4 new additions, Georgia State and Augusta, Georgia Southern, and Kennesaw, this last year, if you had a 3.4 GPA, you didn't have to submit test scores. So they're changing from test optional with a 3.4 to requiring them for those, but they are going to be test optional for the other 19 schools in the country, as long as they meet the minimum high school GPA requirements. And I have been getting ready to just sound off on North Carolina because they were talking about a big announcement in April for test scores. And it looks like they're saying what they're going to give. They're going to give all of their schools a heads up of at least a year, 1 or 2 year notice of whatever the decision is. To be honest, I'm expecting something similar for North Carolina. I'm expecting UNC Chapel Hill, North Carolina State, for sure, and possibly a couple other schools in the state system to go back to requiring tests, and then for the majority of them to stay test optional. That's what I'm expecting. But once again, let's wait until we see exactly what the policy is. But they're basically saying something similar to Georgia, that it's not going to be effective immediately. So class of 2025 doesn't have to worry. All right. I got to say something about University of Connecticut. And I'm not going to say all I want to say because I want to be able to interact with either one of our co-hosts or an interview and go into more detail on this. But the University of Connecticut is implementing early decision effective immediately for the class of 2025. This is a pretty big deal. So when you look at, I know some people are like, what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is how few public schools have early decision. Most of them are philosophically opposed to early decision. Everybody pays taxes, but you're implementing a binding decision in a way that only people that don't need to compare financial aid offers generally feel comfortable committing to. I mean, most people are not comfortable committing to such a big high ticket item without seeing how much they'll have to pay. And so it's something that families of means don't have to worry about. They join the University of Virginia, and it was very controversial when they went back to it in 2019. Big article on Washington Post on the cover. And then just last July, University of Vermont went to early decision. So the question is this a trend? And I'm just throwing questions out now. But we're going to come on and discuss this. And to get matters even more confusing, the state of Virginia had 7 schools that had early decision, public schools, and it was other schools as well. And, Virginia Tech, William & Mary, and several others. But Virginia Tech walked it back and said, we're no longer doing it. We don't think it's equitable. So we're going to talk about why UConn is doing this. And here's the question. I don't get too much into this right now, but the University of Connecticut is proposing multi-year reductions to address its $70 million deficit. Some of the flagship schools now in the Northeast are experiencing financial distress. Penn State is one. We've talked about West Virginia in the past, and now UConn. And there's a lot that's been written about it. We haven't talked about it on the podcast. But this $70 million deficit, they're calling for massive budget cuts to a bunch of programs, and there's massive backlash from the faculty. And so a lot of people are saying, okay, UConn, you had a lot of athletic success. You're coming off back-to-back national championships. You've had a lot of success with your women's basketball team. Are you just leveraging your position and your stature to target out-of-state students who will pay $20,000 to $30,000 more in tuition and to lock them in so you don't have to compete with them? And if that's what you're doing, is that a good thing or a bad thing? So I'm just throwing it out now to let you guys know, because it's a really big decision. You don't see, go down all the flagship schools that you can think of. All the UCs and the Michigans and the Wisconsins and the Minnesotas and the Ohio States and the Georgias and the North Carolinas and the Texases. And I mean, Massachusetts, you just go down all of them, Washington, Oregon, they don't have early decision. To go to early decision when you're in this financial turmoil, smart, astute move, taking advantage of your marketing position with your athletic success to come up with a creative way to lock more money into the coffers? Or is it going to hurt in-state students if you take more out-of-state students? Is it going to disadvantage students that are not of means? Just throwing out questions and not easy answers, but it's something we're going to come back and discuss. And also, perhaps more importantly, is this a trend now? Is it a trend? Is the dam about to break? And now this is what you're going to see moving forward. All right, well, now transition to the question from a listener.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right, Julia, ready for a question from Allison from New Jersey?
Yeah.
All right, let's play it.
Hi, Mark. My name is Allison, and I live in New Jersey. I'm a longtime listener of the podcast, and I very much appreciate all of the work you do. I'm a mother to 3 sons who are 16 months apart, 1 freshman and 2 sophomores who are twins in high school. 1 is hoping to play D1 lacrosse, 1 is interested in nursing, and 1 may want to walk on to a sailing team or club. We've already begun researching schools and programs online and have even visited a few campuses, primarily because our athlete can be recruited as a junior. I'm admittedly a type A person and very organized, so I'm looking for a way for us to manage the process with our 3 boys in what will be a very busy 1 to 2 year period. There will be a lot of moving parts and deadlines to keep track of. Can you please direct me to a management tool that can assist us with the tasks and timelines that go along with applying to college? We have engaged a college advisor who is assisting us with course selection in high school, extracurricular activities, identifying schools that we may have not already considered, etc., etc. But I'm wanting a good old check-in-the-box kind of system. Any help is much appreciated. Also, I'd love for you to consider a short segment on nursing programs available. Thanks again.
I'll start with this one. First of all, Allison, it's a good thing that you are organized in type A, because 3 kids alone is tremendous amount of work. We had 2 and they were 2.5 years apart, and that was a lot of work. I can't imagine having 3, and then I can't imagine them being 18 months apart, and then they're all different. You've got your sailor over here, you've got your lacrosse player, and then you have your nursing student. So it's good that you're on it. I am going to encourage you to go back into the archives of our podcast. In year 1, someone I was working with shared an incredible tool that he used to really help keep his student on task and do all of these things. And since then, I've had other people use it, and they've said great things about it. I personally have not used it, but I've just heard so many great things from people that have, and it's an app called Trello. And he actually demoed it for me, and it's really cool. Are you familiar with Trello at all, Julia?
Yes, I did. It didn't occur to me. I used to be a project manager for research, and we all use Trello.
Well, talk to our listeners about Trello, because Trello is the best tool that I know of that's answering Allison's question. So why don't you talk to Allison about kind of how Trello worked, because I've just heard from others and I've had it demoed to show how to use it in the college process. I've never actually used it. It sounds like you've actually used it.
Yeah, I guess to me, I'm trying to think how I guess I really use it in a very specific capacity. So it's a project management tool that a lot of people use. And the lowest level suite, I think, is either free or quite affordable. But it allows you to really customize a calendar, a plan. It's sort of like Gantt chart-esque, if you know what a Gantt chart is, where it can really prioritize different tasks on a timeline and also the specificities of each task and who's responsible for what. So I've actually used it with other people, if that makes sense, as a project manager. And I used to manage about 12 different research assistants and about 8 different grants at any given time. So it allowed me to put all of that into one place. So it hadn't occurred to me, but that makes sense that it could be really effective for admissions. I would just say this about Trello or any other product management tool is that it's only as good as what the information you put into there. And so sounds like it's great for your personality just because it does require a little work on the front end on making sure you're just very detailed and specific about the inputs you're putting in terms of timeline expectations. But essentially, if you're the depository for all the information and research, you just need to plug that into Trello. And then your 3 sons can easily follow along with that. It's a really good collaborative and team-based tool.
Yeah, and Allison, if you go back, it's interview 34 by Daniel Green, and it's called How to Use the Trello app to Stay Organized with Your College Application. So he gets into the details of how to actually use it in a college context. The other one that I've had my students use and swear by, in fact, for one of them said it was a complete and total game changer. And I've had it before here as a recommended resource. It's called Todoist. Todoist. Are you familiar with Todoist at all, Julia?
No.
Yeah, Todoist. That's the other one that I've heard great things from. One of my students completely said it just transformed him. By the way, this can be great for just homework too.
Yes.
And staying on top with all your homework. And so those are the 2 that I'm most familiar with. The third one is Asana. That's also really, really popular. But I know for my students, Trello and Todoist are the ones that I've heard really good feedback from. And just so you know, Julia mentioned price. Like Trello starts at like $5 a month. Asana's around $11 a month. There's one that I don't have experience with from my clients, but I hear great things from in general, and that's called Monday.com. In fact, I was researching them for a while from a stock standpoint, but Monday.com is maybe the newer kid on the block, but a lot of people are really raving about Monday.com. But those would be the ones that I would look at, would be Trello, Todoist, Asana, and Monday.com. I know of a few others, like Teamwork is one, ClickUp is another one, but I would focus on looking at those and just go through a demo and check them out. And I'll tell you what, can you send a voice message back that we could play on the air? It would be helpful to a lot of people. Here I am putting work on our listeners, Julia. I would love for you, because you're type A, I'm going to take advantage of that. Why don't you go back and compare Trello to Monday.com, Asana, and Todoist, at least those. I won't ask you to look at Teamwork or ClickUp, and tell us what you learn, and we'll play it on the air. Friends, by the way, we upgraded our Speakpipe subscription, so you can now leave a 5-minute message. Before, under our previous plan, you only had 90 seconds, and some listeners were getting their messages cut off. So if you want to give us a 3 to 5 minute review of your research, we will share it with the broader listening family. But definitely go back and check Daniel Green's interview number 34. And if you're new to the podcast and you wonder, like, how do you access these? Well, you just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com, and there's just in the search bar, put Trello in, and it's just spelled Trello, and it'll pull up right away. That's the easiest way to do it. And I say go to yourcollegeboundkid.com because that way you'll get the entire interview in one setting. You won't have to go and find the exact timestamp and play part 1, part 2, part 3. And so that's why it's just kind of better to do it that way. Any final thoughts, Julia?
No, I'm looking forward to hearing what's good. I might need to get back into the Trello game if that's the case.
Yeah, thanks, Allison. Great question. Best of luck. 3 kids, 18 months apart.
Yeah,
Wow.
Good luck. Wow.
Yeah. Then again, I mean, I'm sure this is the case for you too, Julia. Do you have you worked with triplets? Because I've worked with a decent number of triplets over the years, and that's you haven't. I have, like, not 10 times, but I've done it like more than 5 times.
No, I've actually had the last 4 years. I've had more than 2 sets of twins in each of my caseloads, but never triplets.
twins are like common. Like I was doing a search the other day, what percentage of people are twins?
Yeah.
And because like we both have a lot of twins, and
Yeah. Well, it's more common among wealthy folks, and then this generation of students applying to very selective schools have older parents, and so it's more common with fertility treatments, obviously. So that's why we can often see more twins in wealthier college-going populations.
it's 3% overall of the population.
Oh my
3% of
gosh.
babies are
Feels
born
like
in
more for us, right? Like,
yeah, it does feel like more than that, but
yeah.
I'd say it probably feels for me like 5, probably like
Yeah.
5%. One, maybe at least 1 out of 20. At least 1 out of 20
Yeah.
would be twins. And you know what's crazy? This may be my first time in 10 years that they go to the same college. My twins they do not end up at the same college.
Oh, wow.
They just don't. They don't want to go to the same college. They either strongly don't want to go or it's a preference.
Yeah.
But I've had times where there was overlap. Like, hey, we both like this school, and if we get in this school, we'll go.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's never been like animosity. It's never been like I hate your guts and I don't want to be around you anymore. It's just, I just want my own identity. I've been connected at the hip to you, and I just want to go. The same reason why a lot of times people don't like to go to the same school where their older sibling is already at. That's their school. And I get that. My dad was assistant principal, and in 8th grade, I was supposed to go to the school that he was assistant principal at, and I was not liking it at all. And when he said, son, I'm transferred to another school, I was like, yes!
Yes, yeah. That was my dad. My grandmother was taught at the school that he went to, and she did have at some point she had an administrative position, and he got in a lot of trouble, and it was just terrible because she would know, obviously.
I mean, I was like, you're going to be known as Alfred Stucker's son everywhere. I want my own identity. And partly that reflects, I'm very independent.
Right.
So it probably reflects my independent mentality, but I totally relate. I get it. Just like I totally, totally get. This happens to me every year, Julia, where a parent might kind of want a student to stay closer to home, and the student is just not having it. I have, happened to me 3 times in the last 2 years. In fact, last year it was UPenn. And the student got in, and they're like, I walk by that every day, West Philly, every day. No adventure. This year it's LMU. Dad wants a student to go to LMU. That's Loyola Marymount, by the way, for those of you. It's in Los Angeles. And the student is like, I can see LMU out of my window. It's a great school, but no adventure. And so that's one thing I tried to, I'm only bringing this up because it's something for parents to think of, that there's some adventure in going away to college, trying something new, having a new experience. Now, sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes I have the parent, like I have a student right now and from South Florida, and the student wants to go to Miami, and the mom was like, no, get away. And the mom went to Miami. And she's like, no, get away. I want you to experience something new. Sometimes it works that way, but more often than not, it's the other way around, where the parent wants the kid closer and the kid wants to have some adventure. And so how did we end up here from Trello? How did I do that? We went Trello to twins?
Yeah, Trello to twins.
It's just one of our everyday conversations. Well, hopefully we were still on the Trello conversation, weren't we, Julia?
Well, yes, because we were talking because it's the twins, and then you were asking.
The twins to set us off on twin talk, and then triplet talk, and then adventure, and then staying close versus going further away talk. It's all good. Well, hopefully this was helpful, and please report back. I'm very curious. Who wins the test? Trello, Asana, Monday.com, or Todoist? By the way, Todoist is free. I will throw that out there. Awesome. Thanks, Julia. Okay, friends, I said it was a sandwich episode, so I'm going to play another question from a listener. If you're a regular listener, this will sound familiar. We ran it about a month ago, and then I have a few comments.
Hi, my name is Katie. I am a mom from New Jersey. First of all, thank you so much for your podcast. I am now a listener who listens and waits for it every Monday and every Thursday and has told all of my friends. So thank you. This is enormously helpful. One challenge I'm having, though, that I think other parents are probably having too, is that we may have one person in the household who's listening to a lot of podcasts and reading up and starting to understand how different the world is and the college admissions world is now than it was when I went to college 25 plus years ago. But we may have other people in our family, our spouses, our parents, except aunts and uncles, et cetera, who don't. And so they are still feeling like, their expectations for our kids are still that they will, go to one of the 20 colleges that they know the name of, or, where they went, et cetera. What is a good way to share this information, or, if there's articles or some sort of resource or some good way to explain to our loved ones who also want to support and care deeply about our kids that this is a different world that we are in now, and the school they end up at will be amazing and will be hopefully a great fit for them, but it may be a name they've never heard of. And that is actually great and okay. And they should be excited about that and be supportive of that throughout the whole process, and not accidentally create undue pressure for the kids going through that process now. Any advice or thoughts you have on that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you so much.
So friends, after I answered that question, and you may remember this question I answered solo, a listener wrote in and said, I really enjoyed your answer, but you know what really worked for me with my husband? Having him read the book, Who Gets In and Why by Jeff Selingo. And as soon as I heard that, I'm like, you know what? That's exactly what this dad in New Jersey told me. I had this dad in New Jersey, and he had gone to high-powered schools, and he'd wanted his kid to go to high-powered schools. And I was trying to let him know it's not the same as it was 30 years ago. And I recommended Who Gets In and Why and Valedictorians at the Gate by Becky Sabke. And he came back and said, that book, Who Gets In and Why, totally shattered my whole perception of everything. And all of a sudden, he got it in a way he hadn't got it before. And so I was planning on coming on here and sharing that. And then the whole interview with Jeff Selingo just happened really fast. We were just communicating privately about some topics in higher ed. And I said, hey, Jeff, why don't you come on the podcast? And then 3 days later, I was interviewing him. And so here we are discussing his book. So I was planning on coming on and talking about this before this whole interview came together. I mean, some interviews literally take me 4 years to put together from the time someone commits. This was like 3 days. So it's just really weird how that works out. But then last week, I did a session for the first time with this mom in South Florida. And she was like, this is not a podcast listener. And she's like, I really got insights in how college admissions work by reading this book called Who Gets In and Why. And then 6 hours later, I did a first-time session with a listener and a mom in Oklahoma, and she told me the same thing. And so, I've been telling people this book, Who Gets In and Why, Rebecca Sapke's book, Valedictorians at the Gate, I think explain the college admissions process maybe better than any others out there. But I think I may not fully have grasped it. I think maybe I'm too close to it. I don't know. I know I have 2 friends in the college admissions world who give this book to every one of their students. Because they feel it's that impactful. But just after all of these things coming together all at once, I wish I had added that to my answer. Read Jeffrey Selingo's book, Who Gets In and Why. And I still stand by my words. I'd still like Rebecca Sapke's book, Valedictorians at the Gate, as well. I think those are 2 outstanding books to give to someone who's not you're a podcast listener. They're not. You're farther ahead. They're not getting it. They're still thinking it's the way it was in the 90s. And so I wanted to just add that to my answer. All right, we'll now transition to my interview with Jeff Selingo.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, if you missed part 1 of my interview with Jeff Selingo, I strongly encourage you to go back and listen to episode 430 so you can hear it. But in part 2, Jeff discusses where he sees undergraduate and graduate certificates going. Will they be a competitor to the college degree? Jeff discusses what he learned from his experience spending a life inside 3 different admission offices. Jeff answers a confusing question I have. Just how many high schools actually are there in this country? Jeff tells us about a new book he has coming out in 2025, and he tells us why he wrote it. Jeff goes on the hot seat in our lightning round. Jeff shares how to connect with him and his content. And finally, Jeff talks about his thoughts on dual enrollment. Listen and enjoy. And the other reason why names are so tricky is because there is such a thing as regional prestige, right? Because part of prestige is have people heard of it. So wherever someone's located at, give me a school that's, especially if it's a flagship or even a somewhat selective private, but maybe not one of the 30 or 40 most selective privates. If it's within like 100 miles of where they live, it tends to have a lot of cachet in their mind because they know alum, people have heard of it. And it may be a school that in other parts of the country has like no name recognition. So I find it's also regionally impacted as well. It's just, it's just my perception on that.
Yeah, I think you're right on that.
So one of our co-hosts wanted me to ask you, the rise of undergrad and grad certificates are something that's definitely noted. Do you see that continued trend? Do you think it'll ever be a real alternative to the college degree? I mean, colleges are trying to come up with additional revenue streams, right? Whether it's international recruitment, online courses, certificates. Where do you see things going with these certificates?
I don't think it will be a replacement. I think it will be a both and. So I, for example, at the undergraduate level, I can see certificates stacking up, just like a 2-year degree could stack up into a 4-year degree right now. So I could imagine somebody starting with a bunch of certificates that over time give you enough credits to get closer to a bachelor's degree, and then maybe you only have to take a year to do it. The other way I see them is how the University of Texas is now using them, where they're embedding certificates into undergraduate degrees to give them more value. So you can get an industry-based certificate, for example, in Adobe or Microsoft or AWS, or you could get a certificate in project management or in communications, and then that would embed in your bachelor's degree. And then at the graduate level, I do see them increasingly being an alternative to the traditional master's degree. Now, probably not law or medicine or even business, but I definitely can see certificates where people say, I need a specific skill in something, and I don't need a full-fledged master's degree in order to do that. And again, over time, a bunch of those certificates could actually equal a master's degree. So that's where I really do see them replacing it, but not at the undergraduate level.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, let's transition and I want to talk about both your books. I know you've written There's Life After College, and I've read that book, but I want to talk to you about Who Gets In and Why, A Year Inside College Admissions. I'm talking about that book and your new book coming out. So what did you learn? I mean, you've been in this space for a while, but you're not going to have an experience like that. And for those of you who don't know, Jeff spent a year inside Emory's admission office, Davidson, and UW, University of Washington. You had to learn some things that either you were not aware of or, wow, that's true to this extent. What would you say those things were, your takeaways?
So my big takeaways is, first of all, there's not one system. And I think you know this, right? I think this is hard for parents and students who are coming to this, especially for the first time. You could apply to 9 or 10 schools. They might all use very different admissions systems in terms of evaluating candidates. And I saw that at UW, University of Washington, Emory, and Davidson. All were very different in how they evaluated applications, even how they read applications. Also, the breadth and depth of their applicant pool really surprised me. I think a lot of parents and students have a lot of context for the local population, for their own school, for their own community. And they think, wow, my kid is really good. And then you end up sitting in these offices and you see multiples of the same kid over and over again from cities and places all over the US and also over the world. And that's when you realize just how difficult it is to sort through these and to figure out who gets accepted and who doesn't. Those are my two big takeaways in terms of how we tend to, again, talk about college, higher education, admissions as a monolithic system. And it really isn't at the end of the day.
No, I really appreciate both of those points. And we try hard on this podcast to strike a balance between educating students. A saying I often say is, you think you're in a bathtub, but you're in an ocean, because it's such a vast world out there. Oh, by the way, I got to clarify this with you. So I read some places there's 43,000 high schools in this country. I read other places there's 34,000 high schools in this country. What does your research show?
So this is a good question. I think a good number is like 25,000. The problem is that it depends on how many, are you talking about district? So sometimes people are talking about districts. It's hard to sometimes expand on or extract like middle schools and junior highs from high schools. I think the number that I eventually settled on after talking to people at the National Bureau of Education Statistics, National Commission of Education Statistics, is around 25,000 high schools.
Okay, good. Well, I'll change my rhetoric because I think at one time you had said 43,000.
I did,
right?
and it was a mistake, right?
That's okay.
Because I think we were adding a bunch of things together that shouldn't have been added together.
Well, thanks for correcting, because I like to point out, I've often said our listeners have heard that means there's 86,000 kids, number one and number two in their class. That's a whole football field. But so what? 50,000 is still a football field too. It's a lot of people.
Well, and remember, not every college is getting applicants from every school. So I think the year I might have been at Emory, I think they had something like 8,000 schools that applied, 8,000 different high schools that applied to them, right? So that's still a big number when you think about it.
Right. And one thing we know is that the top kids generally do shoot for a lot of the same schools. There is a lot of overlap. Of course, local flagship's always going to be appealing as well. And I get that. By the way, I have to give you a compliment on your book. I've interviewed both Will Segura on this podcast and Chris.
I heard that one.
Oh, you did?
Yes, because he talked about the opening of the book where he's in. And I'm glad that he said that I kind of captured the mood in the room. Yeah,
and I don't know if you heard when I interviewed Chris Gruber, although you know what? This was an off-line conversation with Chris.
Okay.
He said...
No, I don't think I heard that. Chris Gruber's great.
Oh, he's absolutely great.
One of the best.
Chris said you absolutely nailed it. Because, I wanted to know. I said, listen, you know this. It's not easy getting a school to let you sit in, right? You even said, you approached, I think, a couple dozen people.
Yep. And
it's pretty risky, right? What's going to go out there and how's it going to be read? And so I was curious. I was like, do you regret you did it? Did Jeff nail it? He said he absolutely nailed it. And I know I think you guys might be in a book club together or whatever. I think you have a good relationship. But
yeah, I've kept in touch with almost everybody, a lot of people in the book. So it's hard though. And it was, I will tell you, I'm not quite sure I could do this book today because a couple months ago, I approached a bunch of colleges about getting back in for a piece that I was going to do to update it, and came out in New York Magazine a couple of weeks ago. And most refused to talk to me. So I think this book would be much harder to do today if I tried to do it. The world has changed, as you know, even more so than 2018 when I first approached these schools.
Well, in 2022, I had a commitment from the president of Claremont McKenna to come on here and talk about striking the balance between free speech and protecting your student body from hate speech, and where's the line? And there's no way he's coming on here now. You know what I mean? and talking about that stuff. It's just, that's my fault for not following up. But anyway, the world has definitely changed. So we're about to wind down here, but let's talk about your new book, which I'm super excited about. I know it's coming out in 2025. And just tell us a little bit more about it.
Yeah, so right now, tentative title is called Dream School, a college admissions playbook for the rest of us. And the origin of it is really from Who Gets In and Why, because when I would go and talk about it to parents and students and counselors, they would say, okay, Jeff, this is all fine and good. You kind of gave us a look inside the college admissions process, particularly at more selected places. What if we don't want to go to one of those places? What if we can't get into one of those places? What if we can't afford one of those places? How do you're encouraging us to open the aperture on the lens of our college search and telling us to look at more than just 20, 40, 60, 80 schools. What are we looking for? And so the first half of the book is, first of all, going to persuade you that you need to open that aperture, because as you know, there are still a lot of people out there who think they're going to win the lottery and get into one of these schools. So I'm going to really kind of update a lot of the work from Who Gets In and Why, but also kind of go into new areas about how college admissions has really changed even in the last 5 years. The second half of the book, though, is really going to be the bulk of it. And that's going to look at what makes a good school. So mixture of both quantitative data that some of it's been out, not all of it's been in the public realm. So I'm working with a lot of NESE data, for example, the National Survey of Student Engagement data. I'm working with a number of other entities, including Burning Glass, which looks at outcomes. So there's a lot of data sets I'm looking at that haven't been combined in the way that I'm hopefully going to be able to combine them. So between that quantitative data and the qualitative data of covering colleges for 25 plus years, I'm hoping to not create a formula, but help guide people at here are the things that really matter in finding a good college. And then I'm going to name some names. I'm not coming up with the rankings. I'm not doing a college that changes lives book, right? But it will name some names to give people some idea on the types of institutions that they should look for.
And you're naming on the positive side rather than calling people out. Yeah, that don't scorch journalism. Well, that's going to be awesome. Any idea like when in 2025 we talking?
Yeah, so right now we're looking at August. No specific date yet, but it'll probably be similar to when Who Gets In and Why came out. Probably August, September of 2025. So if you're a junior in high school right now, not that helpful, but probably more helpful if you're a freshman, sophomore.
Well, I have a couple ideas. I'll talk to you offline about.
Okay, please do. Yeah, I'm always looking for ideas.
Yeah,
and also looking. And please raise your hand. I'm going to be looking for some pre-readers. Of people who this was really helpful. I'll tell you with Who Gets In and Why, where I was able to send some chapters or even the entire book previously to people to say who are a variety of counselors and parents to say, first of all, does this resonate with you? And B, where do you think there's some BS in there that you want to call me out on? Be honest, and that was really helpful.
No, this is awesome, and count me in on that, and I'll mention some others as well. I think it would be awesome.
Perfect. Yeah, let's touch base offline.
That was great. Well, Jeff, no first time guest gets away. You've heard our podcast without going on the hot seat, but I'm only going to give you one question because I wanted to focus on the content so much. You can't be in education, no journalism, no higher ed. What else would interest you for a career?
I've always wanted to be an investigator with the National Transportation Safety Board.
Wow.
I don't
What's
know
the
what
appeal?
Yeah, I don't know. I just have always been fascinated by how things happen and why. So on my 13th birthday, the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded.
Yeah.
And so I always was fascinated by when things go wrong. How do they go wrong? Now, my problem is I was not very good in math and science, which is why I sometimes I tell people I went into journalism because you kind of don't need math and science. Although today, to be honest with you, you need it more than ever, even in journalism. And so that's probably why I ended up not doing it. But there's a new book, and I'm kind of sorry I didn't write this. There's a new book coming out actually on the Challenger disaster from 1986 in May of this year. And I can't wait to read it because it was something that really kind of got me going on like when there are big accidents, airlines, space shuttle, trains, cars, like what went wrong and why. And that would have been kind of cool. Plus, it would have been cool to have one of those jackets, that like FBI types wears, right? But oh well, I'm doing what I'm doing.
There you go. You learned some interesting things. One of our co-hosts, Lisa Ruff, recently interviewed Jeremy Lowe, the VP of Enrollment at AU now. And he said, I'd be a lawn cutter. And, you kind of laughed. He said, no, I'm dead serious. Like, I did that job. It was the most peaceful thing, trying to make people's grass green. And, it's just kind of fascinating. You get another dimension on people. Talk to us, Jeff, about how people can find you and follow you, and talk to us a little bit more about your next newsletter, what they could expect if they sign up for that too.
So the best way to find me is at jeffselingo.com, where you could connect with me on socials, Instagram, X, LinkedIn, I'm pretty active on. And then the next newsletter comes out every other week if you sign up for it. It's a free newsletter that looks at everything, not just around admissions, but really what's next for higher education in general. And also tells you about some of the events that I have that are also free, that podcasts and also webinars. And then you can also tune in to the Future You podcast, which really is focused on future of education generally, that I co-host with Michael Horn. And we've been doing that for 7 seasons, and that comes out every other week as well.
Can I sneak in one more question?
Yeah.
One of our co-hosts wanted me to ask you about, you've been talking about dual enrollment, dual credit, a little bit on your Future You podcast. I heard a recent episode on that as well. Where do you see that going? And what's your advice for families that are trying to decide, do I take a dual enrollment, dual credit class?
as you know, incredibly popular in so many high schools. We referenced an Ohio audit of what's happening in Ohio around dual enrollment. I'm a little concerned that colleges in particular are pushing this because it helps their enrollment numbers, and that some of these courses are just not of high quality, and some colleges won't accept them as much as they might accept an AP and so forth, or an IB course. So just buyer beware. Don't think, and we heard in our podcast from the researcher at the Community College Research Center at Columbia who researches this, who shows that these students who take dual enrollment courses tend to graduate in 4 years instead of 5 years. So it may hasten the time to degree a little bit, but don't think it's going to suddenly save you 2 years of college if that's the reason you're doing it. So buyer beware more than anything.
I think with the rising cost of college, it's becoming appealing because people don't have to go get the 3, 4, or 5 on the AP, especially for public schools. And it's mostly the most selective schools that say, hey, we're not giving you double. Like the Davidson didn't give my daughter credit for her dual enrollment classes because they said, I'm not giving you double credit.
Yeah, I'm not telling people not to take them, but just make sure you go in eyes wide open about how they might be used in college and the quality of the courses, who's teaching them, where you're taking them, are they mostly online, are they in person? That's all. I'm not, I hope people listen to the podcast episode because there's a lot of data on the courses, and I will tell you, my co-host Michael Horn is a little bit more skeptical than I am, but it's just make sure you go in with eyes wide open.
Awesome. Thanks again. Really appreciate your generosity here on a Sunday morning. Thanks, Jeff.
It was great to be with you. Thanks.
My pleasure. Friends, on Monday's episode, Susan and I will discuss a new book by Stephen Bird, who's somewhat of a whistleblower on enrollment management. He's got a new controversial book out, and it's called Lifting the Veil on Enrollment Management, How a Powerful Industry is Limiting Social Mobility in Higher Ed. There's an excellent article out about this book, and Susan and I will have a robust discussion about what I believe is going to be a really important topic. I really hope you'll tune in and listen. Jill and I will answer a question from a listener from Texas who wants to know how colleges calculate the travel figures they share in their cost of attendance information. How do they come up with that? So I'll be sharing that information as Jill and I discuss that. And for our interview, it'll be part 3 or 4 with our homeschool experts, college counselors Dr. Michelle Livard and Holly Ramsey, who have an upcoming book, by the way, coming up on homeschooling, and Liam Daly, an admission officer at Beloit College, who serves as a homeschool liaison and specialist for homeschool applicants. And we'll be talking about how admission officers evaluate homeschool students. And for our college spotlight, Kevin Newton is back to talk about the London School of Economics, aka LSE. And friends, remember, it's not where you go. It's not where you go. It's not where you go. It's what you do when you get there, what you do when you get out of there. That is what will determine your career success. See you on Thursday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stylianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcast. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.